Why do conflicts persist for years on end in places like the Middle East, Colombia, and parts of Africa? Well, today we're joined by anthropologist Aldo Civico, director of the International Institute for Peace at Rutgers University. Thanks for coming on board today.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
You know, comedian Joan Rivers coined the phrase, "Can we talk?" And it seems to me, from what you're telling us, talking is where all of this starts.
Yeah, and it's not only talking, but talking to the enemy. Is that possible? You know, and I think that's the fascinating thing today. We have to find out a way in which we can actually meet the challenges, the global challenges, the conflicts we are facing today. I think for a decade we have tried an emphasis on security, and we are finding out in Afghanistan, in Colombia, that that's not really working. And so we are going back, actually. Yeah, the use of force. And so we are going back to adding the component of mediation and talking to the enemy as an important component to that.
You know, we look at the Syrian situation, and the previous gentleman who was there to kind of mediate between the two sides just threw his hands up and said, look, I can't do this.
Yeah.
How do we make verbalizing and dialogue work?
Yeah, well, you know, there is a moment of ripeness when you actually can start talking in an effective way to the enemy. Not every moment is the appropriate one. So the first preparation actually for mediation is trying to get that moment ripe. I think a good example right now is Colombia. After 10 years, again, of the use of force, of reducing the strength of the guerrilla in Colombia, the president, Juan Manuel dos Santos, actually declared that the time was ripe to sit down on a table with the FARC guerrilla. And I think, for example, in Colombia, the time is ripe because the guerrilla on one hand has been weakened, but has also realized that an insurgency will never overthrow power through the use of force. And at the same time, the government has realized that, yeah, now the state is stronger in Colombia, but there is no chance for a military victory in Colombia. And so there is a stalemate, and the only way they can actually come out of this conflict is by sitting down and talking.
So is it a process of each side coming to a point where they're diminishing results? Yeah,
where basically we are realizing that the use of force is not getting to the result they wanted when the conflict started, and that actually is getting to harm them. And that's perceived as the moment of ripeness when it's good to talk, and talking can be helpful.
How did you get started in this process?
Well, you know, I grew up in Italy, as you can guess from my Irish accent. And I grew up in a time where there was political tensions in my own region in northern Italy, in a border zone with Austria. It was a decade of terrorism. The mafia in southern Italy was getting stronger and more vocal. So those were the issues we talked about at home, we talked about in school, and it was very difficult not to be shaped in the imagery by those arguments. And on the other hand, I had a great example in my own family. My grandfather, he was a leader, a founder of the armed resistance against Nazism. And though I didn't get to know him because he died before I was born, but it was certainly for me a role model in the sense that as a citizen we have to do something for our own community. So facing somehow the challenge of Italy when I was around 20, I was thinking, what can I do, which is larger than my just small circle of friends and family. And I decided to move to southern Italy, to Palermo, because there was a very interesting and alive social movement fighting against the mafia, becoming very vocal against the mafia. And so that's when it started, 20 years ago.
I'm guessing that at some point, to get your opposition to the table, you have to have a stake in what's important to them. So in other words, you've got to say, I know this is what's important to you. I want to help you get there. Is that part of the process?
Yeah, it is part of the process, and it's part of a negotiation, right? And I think there are very important steps to do that. You need really to be able to listen to your enemy, to your opponent. If you talk to top mediators, you know, that have mediated very so-called intractable conflicts, Northern Ireland, El Salvador, you will see that the first thing they tell you as a mediator is you have to listen, because you need to understand how is the other actually framing the problem, what are the grievances, and how can we address them. And then there is always a very important part, I think, in any mediation process, which is the saving face. You have to find a way also for your enemy to come out with a dignity. You know,
right.
I go back to Colombia right now. This guerrilla has been fighting for more than 50 years, right? You cannot just ask, and the President Santos said it a few days ago, you cannot just ask them to disarm and to disappear. You need to listen to them, and you need to find a way for them to save face, to give a meaning to the 50 years they have been fighting, even though you disagreed with means and their ideology.
Interesting tactics. We're going to have to send you to the Middle East to solve that one.
That's a long way to go.
A lot of conversation.
Yes.
Thank you, Aldo, for coming on
Thank
board
you for
and sharing
having me.
some insight. Appreciate it.
Thank you.